Welcome back to MidPoint. Veteran CIA intelligence analyst Lisa Ruth joins us. Let's go ahead and spin now to ISIS. This is scary. I had not heard until you mentioned this, that there's the possibility that ISIS now has SAMs, which are surface-to-air missiles, in their possession. That steps the game up to an entirely different level.
It absolutely does. And the wording from the German intel sources is they're calling it a game changer. They're saying that ISIS has taken these weapons from two sources, one from Iraq and one from Syrian rebel fighters. Again, not a big shock. But we have just deployed Apaches there for the first time, not just jets to drop for airstrikes, but Apaches which fly certainly lower. If there are SAMs, this really does make things a whole different ballgame.
But do they know how to use them?
Well, that's the question. Now, keep in mind, however, we did have reporting 2 weeks ago that former Iraqi soldiers and former Syrian soldiers were training them in various weaponry, including jets. If you remember, they were going to use some of these airstrikes. You know, they don't seem to have a problem recruiting trainers, and I'm sure they're paying them quite handsomely. They're making about at least $1 million a day. So, you know, when you put the money out there, people will come.
Fair to say, though, if they are going to use SAMs, if they are going to get inside of jets, somebody is helping train them. It's not as if these guys actually walked in and they had that training to begin with. They're good guerrilla fighters, but they're not technical fighters for the 21st century.
Absolutely, you are absolutely correct. And if you remember when we were talking about Ukraine way back then, and even those rebels, and which pointed back to the Russians, but there is somebody training them. If they're flying jets, if they're using SAMs, that does indicate there is outside training, and you have to start looking around. Who would it be?
More likely Syria and or Iraq. What about Iran? Would Iran get involved in there, you think?
Iran's fighting on the side of the Iraqi government for right now, but again, there are always rogue players out here. I just don't think, it may not be a state actor, but then again, there's so many shifting alliances at all times. I think this is something we have to watch very carefully.
What's the reality currently with regard to Baghdad? Because a report I heard over the weekend said that we had indeed, or that the fighters there had been able to push ISIS back from the city.
That was last weekend. As of today, there was another suicide attack west of Baghdad. I think when we talk about ISIS, we have to be very careful about who's winning and who's losing. Now, keep in mind, they didn't take Kobani, and there was a temptation to say, hooray, we won that battle. But remember, for ISIS, although they are holding territory and they want to, but they are winning in many, many ways. They are continuing to launch attacks. They're continuing to terrorize. That we know the homegrown terrorist threat is growing. I think we have to be careful about saying they're losing, even if they're not exactly winning. It's a very difficult situation.
30 seconds. We're turning the bases over, 2 Afghani bases, to the locals.
We did.
We did. Not a good idea, right?
Unfortunately, it seems to me that the lessons from Iraq are being lost in Afghanistan. And we're trying to say, oh, we have the bilateral security agreement. Don't worry about that. But I have friends on the ground who are telling me today the threat is very, very real, and turning over these bases is a huge mistake.
Lisa Ruth, always a pleasure to have you on the show. I look forward to doing it again next week. Hopefully we get some better news. But then again, I say that every week.
Every week.
Putin will pull off his jacket and everything will change again. All right, while the world worries about Vladimir Putin and his ilk, Americans are more focused at the moment on the coming midterm elections, of course, next Tuesday. In this edition of the Newsmax Countdown to the Midterms, we deal with the Senate race in Iowa between Republican Joni Ernst and Democrat Bruce Braley. It's tough, and it's only going to get tougher.
After 30 years in office, Iowa's junior senator, Democrat Tom Harkin, is ready for retirement. Naturally, he's endorsed Democratic Representative Bruce Braley to take his seat. But Harkin can't just pass the baton. Braley must first battle past Republican challenger Joni Ernst. From the get-go, this race has been tight. Although the polls are starting to lean a little more red, Real Clear Politics analysts still label this race as a toss-up. There are just too many outlying factors. First, there's the Democrats' ability to get out the vote. The Wall Street Journal cited a study which found President Obama's 2012 ground game gave him a 1.6% turnout advantage. If Braley can duplicate that, he all but wipes out Ernst's slight edge. Absentee ballots are something else that could shake up this race. More Democrats have requested early ballots than Republicans. However, the Republicans that did request them are keeping up with the Democrats on getting their ballots back in to be counted.
Countdown to the